They broke 28 bones in my son, and they weren't even real cops. Now, they're facing life in prison, and I'm here to tell you how it all went down." John Davis's voice carried a weight of disbelief and fury as he began his tale. It was a story that seemed almost too outrageous to be true, yet every word was rooted in the harsh reality of what had transpired in the seemingly perfect suburb of Sunnybrook Estates, Florida. John, a 48-year-old mechanic, had always been a family man. He lived for his wife, Sarah, and their 2 children, Timmy, aged 10, and Emily, 7. Their home was a sanctuary, a place where laughter echoed through the halls and the smell of Sarah's cooking filled the air. But lately, that sanctuary had been under siege, not by criminals or natural disasters, but by the very organization meant to protect their community, the Sunnybrook Homeowners Association. The HOA had started innocently enough, with guidelines to keep the neighborhood looking its best. But over time, those guidelines morphed into an oppressive regime of fines and penalties for the most trivial of offenses. A lawn not mowed to the precise height could cost you $50. A car parked slightly askew in your own driveway, that was $100. And heaven forbid you left a holiday decoration up a day too long. That was a $200 fine and a stern letter from the board. It's like living under a microscope, John complained to his neighbor, Mike, one sunny afternoon as they stood by the fence separating their yards. Mike nodded, his expression one of shared exasperation. "Tell me about it. I got fined last week because my mailbox was non-compliant. Apparently, it's half an inch too tall." John chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "That's nothing. I heard the Johnsons got slapped with a fine for having excessive curb appeal. Their flower beds were too colorful. Might distract drivers or something." "Too colorful?" Mike laughed. "What, are they worried someone will crash into the tulips?" "Exactly," John said, shaking his head. "It's absurd. But what can we do?" That question lingered unanswered, as the HOA's grip on the community tightened. Then came the day that would change everything. John first noticed them while washing his car in the driveway. 2 men in dark uniforms, walking with an air of authority that didn't quite match their appearance. Their badges glinted in the sun, but upon closer inspection, they lacked the official insignia of any legitimate law enforcement agency. "Who are those guys?" John asked Sarah, who was tending to the garden nearby. She glanced up, squinting. "I think they're from the HOA. I heard they hired some security team to maintain order." "Maintain order?" John echoed. "In a neighborhood where the biggest crime is forgetting to bring in the trash cans." Sarah shrugged. "You know how Karen is. She probably thinks she's the queen of Sunnybrook." Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, was indeed known for her authoritarian streak. Under her rule, the HOA had become more aggressive, and these new public safety officers were just the latest in a series of overreaches. John watched as the 2 men approached a house where a family was enjoying a quiet barbecue. One of the officers gestured animatedly at the grill, and the homeowner's face turned from confusion to anger. "This isn't going to end well," John muttered to himself. He had no idea how right he was. Because soon, those same fake cops would turn their attention to his own family, leading to an act of brutality that would leave his son with 28 broken bones, and set John on a path of relentless pursuit for justice. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's just say that the HOA had no idea who they were messing with when they targeted John Davis's family. But I never imagined it would escalate to this. John Davis leaned back in his lawn chair, sipping a lukewarm beer as the Florida sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over Sunnybrook Estates. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional hum of a lawnmower or the distant bark of a dog. Sounds that, in John's mind, were the heartbeat of suburban life. But lately, that heartbeat felt more like a nervous twitch, thanks to the Sunnybrook Homeowners Association. The HOA's demands had grown from annoying to outright oppressive. It started with petty fines, the $50 for leaving the trash can out an hour past pickup time. The 100 because their dog Rusty barked at a squirrel too enthusiastically. Then came the 200 threat when Timmy left his bicycle in the driveway overnight. Aesthetic violation. The notice read, signed by none other than Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, with a penchant for power trips. "They're out of control," John said to Sarah as they sat on the porch, watching Timmy and Emily chase fireflies in the yard. "I mean, a fine for a kid's bike. What's next? Charging us for breathing too loudly." Sarah sighed, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. "I heard they fined the Wilsons for their porch light being too dim." "Too dim, John? How do you even measure that?" "With a ruler and a bad attitude," John quipped, earning a chuckle from Sarah. But his smile faded as he thought about the two men he'd seen patrolling the neighborhood in their fake cop uniforms. No badges, just cheap polyester and an inflated sense of authority. The HOA called them the Public Safety Department, but to John they looked like hired muscle playing dress up. The next morning the absurdity hit closer to home. John found a notice taped to his front door, a $75 fine for unauthorized sidewalk art. He stared at the paper, baffled, then stepped outside to see Timmy kneeling on the sidewalk, happily scribbling dinosaurs with colorful chalk. A bright green T. Rex roared next to a blue triceratops, each line drawn with the carefree joy only a 10-year-old could muster. "Timmy, buddy, what's this about?" John called, holding up the notice. Timmy looked up, his face smudged with chalk dust. "I'm drawing Dino World, Dad. Wanna add a velociraptor?" John grinned. "Maybe later." "Did anyone say anything to you about this?" Timmy shook his head. "Nope. Just me and the dinosaurs." John crumpled the notice, muttering, "Vandalism. My ass." He figured it was another of Karen's overreaches, but the fine stung. He was already stretching his mechanic's salary to cover the mortgage, groceries, and Emily's dance lessons. Every dollar the HOA siphoned off felt like a personal attack. That afternoon, while tinkering in the garage, John heard raised voices. He wiped grease from his hands and stepped outside, squinting against the midday sun. Timmy was still on the sidewalk, chalk in hand, but now two men loomed over him, the same fake cops John had seen before. Their uniforms were crisp but badge-less, their belts jingling with gear that looked more theatrical than functional. "Hey kid, you're defacing public property." One of them barked, a burly guy with a buzz cut and a scowl. "That's vandalism." Timmy froze, clutching his chalk. "It's just chalk," he said, his voice small. "It washes off." "Don't talk back," the second man snapped, leaner but no less menacing. He grabbed Timmy's arm, yanking him to his feet. "HOA rules say no markings on sidewalks. You're in trouble, kid." John's heart pounded as he strode toward them. "Hey, get your hands off my son." The men turned, startled, but didn't release Timmy. Buzzcut sneered. "You must be the dad. Your kid's breaking rules. We're the HOA's public safety department, and we're handling it." "Public safety?" John shot back, his voice rising. "You're grabbing a 10-year-old over chalk drawings. Let him go now." The lean one tightened his grip on Timmy's arm, making the boy wince. "Back off, or you'll be fined for interfering with official duties." "Official?" John stepped closer, fists clenched. "You're not cops. I don't see badges. You're just Karen's goons in costumes." The air crackled with tension. Timmy's eyes were wide, darting between his dad and the men. Neighbors peeked from windows, drawn by the commotion but too wary to intervene. John's mind raced. Every instinct screamed to protect his son. But he knew escalating this could make things worse. "Look," John said, forcing his voice to stay calm, "he's just a kid drawing dinosaurs. It's chalk. It's not hurting anyone. Let's all cool off and talk this out." Buzzcut smirked. "Talk? You're lucky we're not hauling him in for destruction of property." "Hauling him in?" John's calm cracked. "You're not real police. You've got no authority to haul anyone anywhere." The lean one shoved Timmy toward the sidewalk, hard enough to make him stumble. "Keep talking, tough guy. We'll see who's got authority." John lunged forward, but the men stepped back, hands on their belts like they were reaching for weapons. Timmy scrambled to his feet, tears in his eyes but too scared to cry. The fake cops turned and walked toward an unmarked black SUV parked at the curb. No license plates, just tinted windows and a sheen of menace. "This isn't over," Buzzcut called over his shoulder. "Clean up that mess, or you're looking at more than a fine." John knelt beside Timmy, checking him for bruises. "You okay, buddy?" Timmy nodded, but his hands shook as he picked up his chalk. "They said I was a criminal, Dad." "You're not a criminal," John said, pulling him into a hug. "You're a kid, and they're bullies. I'm gonna fix this." As the SUV peeled away, John's rage simmered. He didn't know how far the HOA's fake cops were willing to go, but he knew one thing: they'd crossed a line. He thought that was the worst of it, that a stern letter to Karen, or a call to the real police would set things right, but he was wrong. What happened next would shatter his world, leaving Timmy broken and John on a warpath that would bring the HOA to its knees. That day, everything changed. John Davis stood in his garage, the smell of motor oil and metal grounding him, as he tightened a bolt on a customer's carburetor. The radio hummed a classic rock tune, but his mind was elsewhere, on the confrontation with the HOA's fake cops just hours earlier. Timmy was safe now, sketching dinosaurs in the living room, but the image of those badge-less goons grabbing his son's arm burned in John's memory. He'd planned to call the real police after dinner, maybe even march down to Karen Mitchell's house with a copy of Florida's laws on impersonating officers. But fate didn't give him the chance to wait. It was just past 3 p.m. when John heard Timmy's voice outside, bright and carefree.
"This one's a Stegosaurus, Emily."
"See the plates on its back?" John smiled, picturing his son back at his chalk drawings, reclaiming the sidewalk after the morning scare. Emily's giggle followed, and for a moment the world felt right again. Then came the shouting.
"Get up, kid! I told you no vandalism!"
The voice was harsh, unmistakable. Buzzcut, the burly fake cop from earlier. John dropped his wrench, the clang echoing as he bolted out of the garage. On the sidewalk in front of their house, the scene was a nightmare. Timmy knelt beside his chalk dinosaurs, eyes wide with fear. Buzzcut loomed over him, his partner, the lean one, gripping Timmy's shoulder. A small crowd of neighbors watched from their lawns, frozen, as Emily stood a few feet away, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Let him go!" John roared, sprinting toward them. His voice cracked with a mix of fury and panic. Buzzcut turned, startled, his hand jerking back as if caught in the act. But instead of backing off, he doubled down. "Stay out of this, Dad. Your kid's breaking rules again." "He's drawing with chalk," John shouted, closing the distance. "It's not a crime, you idiots." The lean one yanked Timmy to his feet, hard enough to make the boy cry out. "Watch your mouth," he snarled. "We're handling this." John reached for Timmy, but Buzzcut stepped in his path, shoving him back with a meaty hand. "Back off, or you're next." The world slowed. John's heart pounded, every instinct screaming to protect his son. He saw Timmy's face, pale and terrified, and something snapped. He lunged past Buzzcut, grabbing Timmy's free arm. "Let my son go now." The lean one reacted first, shoving Timmy toward the ground with brutal force. Timmy hit the concrete, a sickening crunch echoing as his small body crumpled. Before John could react, Buzzcut's boot swung, catching Timmy in the ribs. Another crack, bones breaking, pierced the air. Timmy screamed, a sound that tore through John's soul. "Stop!" John bellowed, throwing himself at Buzzcut, but the lean one tackled him, pinning him to the grass as Buzzcut delivered another kick to Timmy's limp form. Neighbors gasped, some yelling, but no one dared intervene against the men's fox authority. The attack lasted seconds but felt like years. When Timmy's screams faded to whimpers, the fake cops stepped back, their faces pale but defiant. "Should have followed the rules," Buzzcut muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. John broke free, crawling to Timmy's side, His son lay still, blood trickling from his mouth, arms and legs twisted at unnatural angles. "Timmy, oh God, Timmy," John whispered, hands shaking as he checked for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. "Hold on, buddy, I'm here." The fake cops bolted, sprinting to their unmarked black SUV at the curb. No plates, just like John remembered. Tires screeched as they sped off, leaving chaos in their wake. Sarah ran out of the house, her scream shattering the stunned silence. "What happened?" "Timmy, call 911. John yelled, cradling Timmy gently, afraid to move him. Neighbors finally stirred, one dialing emergency services, another rushing to Sarah's side as she sobbed. Sirens wailed within minutes. Real police, badges gleaming, uniforms official, arrived alongside an ambulance. Paramedics swarmed Timmy, stabilizing his neck and sliding him onto a stretcher. "He's got multiple fractures," one said, her voice grim. "We need to get him to the hospital now." John rode with Timmy holding his hand, whispering, "You're gonna be okay, buddy. I promise." But the words felt hollow. At Sunnybrook General, doctors worked frantically, X-rays revealing a horrifying truth. 28 broken bones, ribs, both arms, a leg, and several smaller fractures. The medical staff exchanged shocked glances. They'd never seen such extensive trauma from a single assault, especially on a child. "How could this happen?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking as she stood beside John in the ICU. Timmy lay in a bed, tubes and monitors beeping, his small body swathed in casts. "They weren't cops," John said, his voice low, trembling with rage. "They were HOA thugs, and they did this over chalk." He clenched his fists, the memory of Buzz Cut's smirk fueling a fire in his chest. "I'm gonna make them pay." The police took John's statement, their faces hardening as he described the badge, less uniforms, and the unmarked SUV. "Impersonating law enforcement is a felony," the lead officer said. "We'll find them. And that SUV's a good lead." Back at the hospital, John sat by Timmy's bed, the medical report in his hands. It listed every fracture, a clinical catalog of his son's suffering that would become key evidence. He thought of the HOA, of Karen Mitchell's smug letters, of the fake cops' arrogance. They'd crossed a line no one could uncross. As Timmy stirred, murmuring, "Dad," John leaned close, brushing hair from his son's forehead. "I'm here, Timmy. And I'm not stopping until they're locked up for good." That night, John made a vow. The HOA thought they could bully his family, but they'd awakened something fiercer, a father's wrath. The fight was just beginning, and John Davis was ready to tear their system apart. But justice was on our side, and we weren't going to back down. John Davis sat in the hospital waiting room, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over his haggard face. Timmy was stable, but the sight of his son in casts, hooked to monitors, fueled a fire in John that no amount of exhaustion could douse. The HOA's fake cops had shattered 28 bones in his boy's body over chalk drawings, and John wasn't just angry, he was resolute. They'd pay, not just for Timmy, but for every neighbor they'd bullied. The fight was on. The first step was finding the right ally. John called Mark Thompson, a lawyer he'd met through a customer at his auto shop. Mark had a reputation for taking on big dogs, crooked landlords, shady businesses, and winning. Over coffee at a diner near Sunnybrook General, John laid out the story: the eyes, petty fines, the badge, less thugs, the unmarked SUV, and Timmy's broken body. Mark's jaw tightened as he jotted notes. "This isn't just assault," he said, tapping his pen. "It's impersonating law enforcement, battery, and a clear case of HOA overreach. We'll bury them." Mark's first move was to dig into the HOA's operations. He uncovered a contract with a shady security firm, Patriot Protection, hired by Karen Mitchell to enforce community standards. The two fake cops, identified through police work tracing the SUV, were ex-convicts, Ray Buzz Cut, Carver, and Lenny Lynn Stokes, with rap sheets for assault and fraud but no law enforcement training. Karen had instructed them to pose as police, thinking it would scare residents into compliance. They thought they were the law. John quipped to Sarah later, But they're just bad at playing dress up. With evidence mounting, John and Mark filed a lawsuit against Carver, Stokes, Karen Mitchell, and the Sunnybrook HOA. The charges were heavy aggravated assault, battery, impersonating law enforcement, and negligence for hiring unqualified goons. Mark didn't stop there. He subpoenaed HOA records, revealing a pattern of extortionate fines and intimidation tactics, from threatening foreclosures over unpaid 50 fees to harassing elderly residents for non-compliant mailboxes. The case exploded into the public eye. A local news station, WFLA9, ran a segment titled HOA Horror Fake Cops Attack Child. The reporter stood outside John's house, Timmy's chalk dinosaurs still faintly visible on the sidewalk, and recounted the brutal assault. Social media erupted, with hashtags like #FayJusticeForTimmy trending on X. Posts flooded in from across Florida and beyond, sharing stories of HOA tyranny. One user described a $300 fine for a wrong-colored fence. Another claimed their HOA banned kids' lemonade stands as commercial activity. John read each one, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just his fight anymore. Neighbors rallied behind him. Mike, from across the fence, organized a community meeting at his house, where dozens shared their grievances. Mrs. Wilson, a retiree, recounted how the HOA fined her $150 for a dim porch light, threatening to lie in her home when she couldn't pay. A young couple, the Garcias, revealed they'd moved away after Karen's goons cited them for excessive noise from their babies crying. "We're with you, John," Mike said, clapping his shoulder. "Let's end this." The police investigation moved fast. The unmarked SUV, traced to Patriot Protection, yielded fingerprints linking Carver and Stokes to the attack. Security camera footage from a neighbor's doorbell cam captured the men's faces as they fled, their fake uniforms clear as day. The real cops arrested them within a week, charging them with felonies that could mean decades behind bars. Karen, meanwhile, tried to distance herself, claiming she never authorized violence. But Mark's subpoenas showed her emails to Patriot Protection, urging strict enforcement and praising the police like presence. John became a reluctant public figure. At a press conference outside the courthouse, he spoke plainly, his mechanic's hands steady despite the cameras. "They hurt my son because he drew dinosaurs with chalk. They thought they could bully us, but they picked the wrong family." Sarah stood beside him, gripping his hand, her eyes fierce with pride. The crowd, neighbors, reporters, even strangers moved by Timmy's story, cheered. The lawsuit wasn't just about money. John wanted the HO dismantled, its leaders held accountable, and new laws to curb HOA power. Mark warned it wouldn't be easy. HOAs had deep pockets and political clout. But John didn't care. Every time he visited Timmy, who was starting physical therapy but still faced months of recovery, he saw the cost of inaction. "We're not stopping," he told Sarah. "Not until they're gone." Though humor crept into the fight, a release valve for the tension. At a community rally, John held up one of Karen's fine notices for unauthorized sidewalk art and deadpanned, "Wes, I owe $75 for Timmy's T-Rex. Maybe I'll pay in chalk." The crowd roared, and even Mark cracked a smile. On X, memes proliferated. One showed a cartoon Karen in a crown, captioned, "Bow to the HOA Queen." Another depicted fake cops running from a giant dinosaur labeled Justice. The real-world stakes were undeniable. Mark cited cases where HOAs faced penalties for hiring rogue security, like a 2023 Florida case where a guard was convicted for assaulting a resident. "Courts don't mess around with impersonation," he told John. And with Timmy's medical report, 28 fractures, that's a slam dunk for aggravated assault. As summer 2024 faded into fall, the trial loomed. John felt the weight of it all. The depositions, the media frenzy, Timmy's slow recovery. But he also felt a spark of hope. The community was united, the evidence was ironclad, and justice was within reach. He didn't know what the courtroom would bring. But one thing was certain: the HOA's days of tyranny were numbered, and John Davis was leading the charge. When the verdict came in, it was a victory for everyone who's ever been bullied. John Davis stood outside the Sunnybrook courthouse, the spring 2025 sun warming his face as he gripped Sarah's hand. Inside, a packed courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The trial against the Sunnybrook HOA, its president Karen Mitchell, and the fake cops, Ray, Buzz Cut, Carver and Lynn Stokes, had gripped the community for months. Timmy's story, a 10-year-old brutalized over chalk dinosaurs, had sparked outrage far beyond Florida, with ex-posts and news segments keeping the pressure on. Today, after a year of pain, legal battles and relentless pursuit, justice was within reach. The courtroom was a battleground of evidence and emotion. John's lawyer, Mark Thompson, presented an airtight case. The HOA's contract with Patriot Protection, revealed through subpoenas, explicitly instructed the security firm to emulate law enforcement presence, to enforce rules. Emails from Karen Mitchell urged maximum intimidation for non-compliant residents, including John's family. The medical report detailing Timmy's 28 broken bones, ribs, arms, a leg, and smaller fractures drew gasps from the jury. Doorbell cam footage showed Carver and Stokes, in their badge-less uniforms, fleeing in the unmarked black SUV after the attack. Their criminal records, including prior assaults, painted them as hired thugs, not protectors. Carver and Stokes took the stand, their defiance crumbling under Mark's cross-examination. Carver claimed they were just following orders, but admitted they'd never been trained as security, let alone police. Stokes, sweating through his cheap suit, mumbled about teaching the kid a lesson. Karen, in a desperate bid to save herself, insisted she only wanted a tidy neighborhood, but her emails betrayed her. 1. Read aloud, demanded Patriot Protection. Make an example of Timmy's chalk drawings. The jury's faces hardened. Karen's reign was unraveling. John testified last, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. They broke my son's body over a $75 fine, he said, holding up the crumpled HO notice for unauthorized sidewalk art. They thought they could bully us, but they forgot what a family fights for. Sarah wept quietly in the gallery, and even the judge, a stern woman with decades on the bench, leaned forward, riveted. The defense, funded by the HOA's dwindling reserves, floundered. Their lawyer argued the HOA wasn't directly responsible for the guards' actions, but Mark countered with case law. HOAs could be liable for negligent hiring, especially when impersonating police led to violence. He cited a 2023 Florida ruling where an HOA paid millions for a similar overreach. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours, a lifetime for John, who paced the courthouse steps, Timmy's smile in his mind. When the verdict came, the courtroom fell silent. The foreman stood. On the charges of aggravated assault and impersonating law enforcement, we find the defendants Raymond Carver and Leonard Stokes guilty. The gallery erupted in cheers. The judge banged her gavel, but her eyes gleamed with approval. On the civil claims against the Sunnybrook HOA and Karen Mitchell, we find them liable for negligence and reckless endangerment, awarding the Davis family $10 million in damages. Carver and Stokes, handcuffed, faced life sentences due to the attack's severity and their prior records. Florida law didn't tolerate impersonation that caused grave harm, and Timmy's 28 fractures were undeniable. Karen, though not criminally charged, was personally fined $100,000 for her role, her reputation in tatters. The HOA itself was ordered to dissolve, its assets liquidated to cover the damages. A new state law dubbed Timmy's Law was already in the works, curbing HOA powers and banning private security from posing as police. John stepped outside the crowd, neighbors, reporters, supporters, roaring their support. He raised a fist, his voice breaking. They tried to break my son, but we broke their system. Sarah hugged him, tears streaming as Timmy, now hobbling on crutches but smiling, joined them. The boy's recovery was ongoing, but his spirit was unbroken. "Can I draw dinosaurs again, Dad?" he asked, and the crowd laughed, a release of shared triumph. Humor laced the victory. At a community barbecue celebrating the OA's end, John held up a piece of chalk and quipped, "Wes, this is legal now. Karen's not here to find me. Neighbors roared, and someone taped a caricature of Karen, Crown Askew, to a defunct HOA signpost. On X, a viral meme showed a T-Rex labeled Justice, chasing a fleeing Karen, captioned, "Oh, a queen, meet Dino Dad." Even Mark, usually stoic, chuckled when a reporter asked if he'd take on another HOA. "Only if they're dumb enough to hire fake cops again," he said. The aftermath was transformative. Sunnybrook Estates elected a new neighborhood council with fair rules and no fines for chalk or dim porch lights. John, inspired by the fight, considered running for city council. "If they want rules, I'll write fair ones," he told Mike, half joking but half serious. The community rebuilt stronger, with barbecues and kids' laughter replacing the HOA's tyranny. Karen, spotted at a local meeting, whined about unfair media bias to a dwindling audience. Neighbors ignored her, their focus on healing. Posts on X reported she'd moved to a condo with, no surprise, a strict OA, prompting a flurry of laughing emojis. "Karma's got a sense of humor," John said to Sarah, scrolling through the comments. The real-world echoes were clear. Courts had long upheld penalties for impersonation and assault, as Mark noted, citing cases where HOAs faced ruin for overstepping. Timmy's law promised to protect others, a legacy born from pain but forged in victory. John visited Timmy's sidewalk, where faint dinosaur outlines lingered. He knelt, tracing a T-Rex, and smiled. "You did this, buddy," he whispered. As spring bloomed, John looked to the future. The scars remained. Timmy's therapy, the memories of that brutal day. But so did their strength. The HOA was gone, the fake cops were caged, and Sunnybrook was free. For John, it was enough, for now.